So chapter 15 is regards to one of the branches of our wonderful little nervous system. This guy right here, the autonomic nervous system. Let's say you get some type of sensation like the superior colliculi has just triggered you to look off to the side, and there's a lion right there. So what it's going to do is it's going to activate this guy right here. And this, at least a portion of it, called the sympathetic division. Now, fight or flight, aka the sympathetic, that's the one where you're trying to put out effort, you're trying to run, you're trying to escape, your adrenaline's running, you're trying to get out of the way. Or you've decided to fight. This jerk right here has done something really stupid. He deserves a good pummeling, so you've gone into fight mode. While if we're talking about the superior colliculi again, you're out in the Serengeti, you've made your mistake, the lion has eaten you, it is now resting, digesting. It's dedicating its resources to pull out all the nutrients it got, and it's now moved on. So, as mentioned before, there is a somatic efferent branch of your system that goes to your skeletal muscles. It is just one nerve going all the way through, which innervates your skeletal muscles, telling it to go ahead and move when it's triggered. The autonomic system is a little bit different. Let's point out a couple of different things first. Let's focus on this guy right here first. Notice that it is actually two nerves, two neurons interacting. One that is, and it's interacting at this thing right here called a ganglion. Based on the positioning of these nerves at this ganglion is what they are called. This is a sympathetic preganglionic nerve. Pre meaning before, and ganglionic is this guy right here. So a preganglionic nerve and a postganglionic nerve. Both the sympathetic and parasympathetic have a setup like this where there's a preganglionic and a postganglionic. And this is where the most of the stuff, or if the nerve has anything to do with a direct contact, this is how it's going to happen. It has to pass through a ganglion. And all these ganglions release this will have an acetylcholine interaction. Now the sympathetic division has a little bit of a different thing going on too. It has a different branch where it's going to innervate the adrenal glands. Those of you that are familiar with the adrenal glands, this is where adrenaline is coming from. Adrenaline's another word for your epinephrine and norepinephrine. We're going to talk about that. And because the way that this is set up, the way that this is going on is the reason why after you jump off a cliff to do some cliff diving, or you're jumping out of a plane or what have you, and you feel that rush of adrenaline and it still lasts there for a long time or after, is because of this. Because it has that slow chemical release. It takes 10 to 15 minutes for epinephrine to finally calm down. You also have this going on here. Notice that the preganglionic neuron is myelinated, while the postganglionic neuron is not myelinated, meaning that it takes a while for that nerve impulse to get down the way. If we were to look at the parasympathetic setup, notice that it has the preganglionic, the postganglionic neuron. Notice that in this drawing, this postganglion is much, much shorter than that of the sympathetic neuron. In fact, if we were to take a look at this guy right here, this is a representation of all the nerves that come off and do the parasympathetic response. Notice that their postganglions, except for right here, are very, very short in comparison. They're very short, very close, meaning that these ganglions, these little nubs along the nerves, you're going to notice out in the body tissue. Also notice really quick while we're here that where they are coming off, a lot of the cranial nerves are coming off obviously in the brain, while the other ones that innervate the lower portions are coming off in the sacral region. A lot of you may remember that a lot of your we're going now to the sympathetic, and a lot of you may have noticed that the plexus for your cranial nerves, your cranial plexus, your brachial plexus, your lower limb, as well as sacral plexus are all down here, but some of you may have questioned, wait a minute, what's coming off this thoracic or this L1 region? Well, that is actually where the majority of your sympathetic nerves are coming off. And they're innervating. A lot of them are innervating along this little bulb or bulbous structure coming along the side of your spinal cord. And a lot of those ganglions are there. Some of them come off at different points, but I digress. That's what's important. So this portion, if I had a highlighter right now and this was a piece of paper, I'd highlight that this is a thoracolumbar and also make note on the slide, like right here somewhere, saying that the postganglions are a lot longer. And because they're unmyelinated, the signals last a lot longer or are delayed, but last a lot longer. And if going back to this one, if I were to make notes on this, I would highlight that it's craniosacral, so a lot of the parasympathetic stuff is coming off of the brain and innervating, and a lot of it, the vitals, I would make a note right here that the vitals are all coming off this vagus nerve and regulating that parasympathetic response. I would also note here that a lot of those complexes are coming off the sacrum as well. Now, just a couple more points to hit up. Both preganglions are releasing for both the sympathetic and parasympathetic, are releasing acetylcholine onto a nicotinic receptor. Down here is the skeletal setup for these chemicals. Acetylcholine looks like this, nicotine looks like that. Innervates these nicotinic receptors and does its thing. Because it innervates this parasympathetic, and there's a lot of parasympathetics with this nicotinic receptor, you get that calming sensation. But you also have a little bit of that energy given back to you as well with that sympathetic stimuli. We also have all of the parasympathetic division. We're looking at the postganglions now. Notice that the postganglions right here and right here have muscarinic receptors. So that's this guy right here, a muscarine. All the parasympathetic receptors have this going on in their postsynaptic bulb, while only just the sweat glands, the things that excrete in the sympathetic response, have muscarinic receptors. Now, how did we know this? Why are we naming this nicotinic? Why are we naming this muscarinic? It's because these molecules interact with them. And muscarine is a toxin that comes from this guy right here, a muscarine mushroom. Now, a lot of mushroom hunters, maybe that's listening right in right now, knows very well that it's extremely difficult sometimes to differentiate between these mushrooms, the edible ones from the non-edible ones. In fact, these poor folks right here weren't able to discern between them and had eaten this poisonous mushroom. And because of it, that muscarine is now interacting with all their parasympathetic receptors on their target tissues, as well as those sweat receptors, which means that these individuals are all sweating profusely, salivating. Because they're doing the parasympathetic, which is a vagal nerve thing again, their heart rate is really, really low. They have vasodilation. So the normal of 120 over 80 is not being met at all. The normal or the lower range of heart rate is 60, and they're down to 40, they're 34 beats per minute. They're having diarrhea, they're having vomiting, they're having all these things in hyperdrive because this muscarine is innervating that postganglionic receptor. Now, finally, there is one more type of postganglionic receptors on their effector cells, and that is solely belonging to the sympathetic division. Only the sympathetic division has this going on. It's the adrenergic. Again, this is being borrowed from the adrenal glands, the name from adrenal or adrenaline, the stuff that's sympathetic. These are the hormones that we will be talking about even more in detail shortly in chapter 18 when we're talking the endocrinology. Beyond that, this is all you need to know about the autonomic nervous system. So if I were to make a couple more slides, if I were a student, I would lump together, I would pull this right here, this muscarine, and I'd put that right here and say this is all the postganglionic receptors that a sympathetic division has. Then I would pull this guy and put it all by his lonesome and say this is the postganglionic receptors that are in the parasympathetic, and only this guy, the muscarine. I would then also just keep this slide and say that all preganglionic neurons throw out acetylcholine onto their target neurons, which have nicotonic receptors. All of them have nicotonic receptors. With that, that is the autonomic nervous system in a very brief nutshell. Good luck, enjoy, and have a good day.